So welcome to the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative Technical Assistance Coffee Chat on NJ PACT REAL for coastal protection and natural enhancements. This is one of a two-part session where tomorrow morning we will be discussing stormwater and flood hazards of the NJ PACT REAL. You may register using the link provided in the chat to join us for that discussion. So my name is Amanda Archer, and I will not only be serving as your facilitator today, but I'll also go into some of the presentation. I work for the Coastal Training Program for the Jack Cousteau National Estuarine Research Reserve, and we are a partner of the NJCRC. For those of you who are here for the first time, the NJCRC is a network of coastal resilience professionals, and the purpose of this coffee chat program is to better facilitate connections between local communities and decision makers with the NJCRC members that can help build capacity towards resilience. This coffee chat was made available to you through the NJCRC Technical Assistance Coffee Chat Work Group. The NJCRC has many other work groups that range from ecosystem monitoring to municipal planning. And it allows you access to connect with practitioners working on resilience initiatives from a wide variety of sectors. And so if you are interested in participating in any of the NJCRC work groups, you can sign up, or to sign up as an NJCRC partner, please fill out the contact form that was posted in the chat. I'd just like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be accessible on the NJCRC website to view at a later date. To view previous technical assistance coffee chat recordings, you can visit the website in the chat. Also, the views expressed during this technical assistance coffee chat are the presenter's own and do not reflect the official policies or positions of the collaborative or any of its organizational partners. Now, thank you all for joining us today. This is our first webinar style chat, so we're going to be working out kinks as we go. But just a little bit of information, you may use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions during the presentations, and we'll do our best to address them during the panel Q&A at the end of the session. There's also the chat feature that you can use, and you can send questions directly to the host and panelists in that section as well. So today we're going to talk about the NJ PACT REAL rules related to coastal protection and natural enhancements. Many of this covers the topics about nature-based solutions, dune management, facilitation of renewable energy, freshwater wetlands, and vernal habitats. It also touches on important seasonal wildlife activities and siting for coastal development. So I would like to introduce you today to our panel speakers, and it really highlights the cross-sector collaboration of the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative. So kicking us off is going to be Tony MacDonald as the director of the Urban Coast Institute at Monmouth University. The mission of UCI is to serve as a forum for research, education, and collaboration that supports development and implementation of policies that support stewardship of healthy and resilient coastal ecosystems and communities based on the best available science. Tony is also a member of the NJCRC board and co-leads the REAL work group that is reviewing the proposed rule. Tim Dillingham has led the American Littoral Society as executive director since 2003. His work is focused on the ecological restoration and protection of coastal areas, a comprehensive program of habitat restoration and resiliency on the Delaware Bay, new partnerships to promote community-based restoration projects, expansion of marine education programs in underserved communities throughout New Jersey, increased public access to the coast, and the use of nature-based approaches to increasing coastal resiliency in the face of a changing climate. And then we have Matt Hayden, and he is a township administrator and director of the water and sewer utility in Stafford Township, New Jersey. Matt is an adjunct faculty member for Villanova's MPA program, and he's a PhD candidate in Old Dominion University's Public Administration and Policy program. He is an MPA from Villanova University, along with an MBA from Rutgers University, and a bachelor's in biological sciences from Rowan. He has been a PMP since 2021, along with being a CEM, CFM, and SHRM SCP. His professional work is related to finance, project management, grants, and administration while also serving the public. So let's see here. We're going to get started. Today we're talking about the resilient environments and landscapes. So on August 5th, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection entered the New Jersey Protecting Against Climate Threats, Resilient Environments and Landscapes, for short, NJ PACT REAL. They entered this proposal into the New Jersey Register for comments. NJ PACT REAL modernizes New Jersey's environmental land use rules to respond to our changing climate. The proposed rules address sea level rise, coastal storm surge, flooding, and stormwater management concerns, also while improving water quality, protecting natural resources, and streamlining permanent processes that will expedite resilient investments in New Jersey for their communities and economy. So I'm going to kick us off to talk a little bit about the science behind the rule. The rule does reference the 2020 New Jersey Scientific Report on Climate Change. And you'll see in this slide that it shows the inland flood protection rule justification that was released in 2023. And this was based on the NOAA precipitation study of 2021. So in the graph, we see the highest observed and projected precipitation change in New Jersey. The blue represents observed precipitation change since 1999, and the green reflects a projected precipitation change under a moderate emission scenario for 2050 through 2029. For 2099. IDA case studies show average flood elevations of 3.1 feet above FEMA's 100-year flood elevation. We're seeing higher temperatures increase the energy in storms and allows the atmosphere to hold more water, which increases the potential for more intense precipitation and flooding. And so the existing flood standards are based on outdated and historical trends that do not account for sea level rise and storm surge. And so roads and buildings that are built today are likely to become unserviceable in 2100. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this graph related to NJ PACT REAL rules. These are the New Jersey sea level rise projections from the Stafford report of 2019. And so these projections are based on a probability model that associates the likelihood of occurrence of sea level rise heights and rates over time that are directly tied to the range of future emission scenarios. So we see that the moderate emission scenarios in yellow. According to sea level rise projection recommendations for the state of New Jersey, which was published in June of 2021, the plan is for a moderate emissions scenario, which is consistent with current global climate policies. And these columns indicate the differences in projections related to greenhouse gas emissions. You don't see these columns through 2050 because the differences of high and low emissions are very minute. And so because of that, the expected sea level rise between 0.9 feet and 2.1 feet by 2050 at this point is unavoidable, and we are locked into these scenarios. So next, when planning for sea level rise projections, it's important to identify the planning horizon of the expected life of an activity. And decision makers should be realistic about the expected life of an activity and not just the design life. So DEP recommended a planning horizon of 2100 as a reasonable projection for the impact of decisions on future generations by considering the siting of structures as well as expected life of an activity that supports systems and services provided. The next thing to do is to consider the relative risk of tolerance of an activity. So the upper end of the likely range sea level rise projection reflects a 17% chance of being met or exceeded. These activities include those that are the damage or loss of which would adversely affect household or community stability and would result in significant investment loss and adversely impact sensitive or socially vulnerable populations. So over time, we have seen that sea level rise projections have tended towards the higher end of the likely range. And so for this scenario, DEP has selected the 5.1 by 2100 sea level rise projection in these planning rules. And so I'd just like to point out that uncertainty is inherent to science. So the STOP and IPCC reports employ similar methodologies, but differ in how they incorporate potential rapid ice sheet loss into their sea level rise estimates. And this is because the process is currently the subject of substantial scientific exploration. Certain rapid ice sheet loss processes are called low confidence processes by the IPCC, but low confidence does not indicate a lower quality estimate of resulting sea level rise. The IPCC authors state that in addition to uncertainty and risk, there's also a time dimension of precaution, and the precautionary principle recognizes that policy action should not always wait for scientific certainty. The approach recommended is to use the best available science for decision-making to protect public health and safety, and the 2019 STOP report provides New Jersey the best available science. We have enough information to see where we are coming from in the past and where we are headed for into the future. So the proposed rules give us a clear timeline to work through these uncertainties without fear by prioritizing public health, safety, and welfare. So just a little bit about how we got here, and then I promise I will stop talking and hand it over to our panelists. So a lot of people start this story in 2020 with Executive Order 100, but I wanted to point out that this is a series of events that goes back much farther for New Jersey. So in 2012, need I remind you that Superstorm Sandy hits New Jersey and changed the way many New Jerseyans think about climate change and resiliency. So in 2016, Rutgers University convened a New Jersey Science and Technical Advisory Panel on sea level rise and changing coastal storms to synthesize to practitioners the most recent climate science needed to inform efforts and increase resilience in New Jersey. In 2019, they reconvened that panel to update the 2016 report. And also in that same year, Executive Order 89 was issued, which directed the creation of a climate change resiliency strategy and climate flood resilience program. In 2020, the NJDEP releases the first scientific report, and this is much of what the science is based on with these NJ PACT REAL rules. So going back to 2020, Executive Order 100 is issued, and DEP is required to adopt protecting against climate threats regulations within 2 years, aka the NJ PACT. In 2021, there was a series of strategies from Executive Order 89 and guidance documents released for recommendations on actions for mitigating and adapting to climate change impacts across communities. In 2022, the Inland Flood Protection Rule was issued and formalized requirements for raising homes and roadways in inland areas and revised stormwater management requirements. You can reference a coffee chat recording on the rules, and that will be put in the chat. In 2023, those rules were effective on July 17th. And in 2024, the Resilient Environments and Landscapes rules were issued. So in May of this year, a courtesy copy was issued. The comment period opened August 5th. Comments are due November 3rd, and it's estimated to be effective July 2025. And so the purpose of this timeline was to show the story behind the NJ PACT REAL rules, and also indicates a series of webinars engagement hosted by the DEP throughout this timeline. And so with that, I'm going to stop and pass it over to Tony so he can talk about the proposed REAL rule and coastal protection and natural enhancements.
Great. Thank you very much, Amanda, and appreciate setting that context. Again, I'm Tony MacDonald. I'm the director of Monmouth University's Urban Coast Institute. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit at sort of a high level, sort of building on Amanda's story, that this has actually been an issue that's been in the public sector and in the debate for a long time, even before Sandy. So UCI came into existence in 2005, and our mission is to actually take science and actually make sure that it's incorporated into good planning, policy, and management. And since our inception, we have focused on sea level rise and coastal community resilience as a priority issue. So that's only gained as importance and in attention over the years. And given the interest in this, I think a lot of other folks are interested as well. And there's nothing like a proposed rule to get people to set up and pay attention to these things. So great to have you here. Next slide, please, Amanda. Again, I want a general overview here a little bit, and it's a lot of words on some of these slides, so I do apologize, but at least they'll be available for folks looking back at this if they haven't participated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work specifically that UCI does around our Coastal Community Resilience Initiative, how that work actually relates to the planning principles under the rule and some of the general lessons learned over our time working on these issues in terms of reducing risk and planning for the future, and specifically discuss two things that are ongoing to let the community know that in addition to looking at this rule, which as Amanda suggested, our NJCRC work group is doing, we are really focused most of our efforts in developing information that's available for communities to implement best practices to make their communities more resilient. On your right, you just see two pictures, and they're really just illustrative of two general statements. And even if folks are concerned about specific aspects of the proposed rule, I do think they reflect a consensus that we can't plan for the future by looking to the past, that as Amanda suggested, we need to think very proactively about what the future is going to look like and be sure, particularly in our infrastructure and resilient investments, that we make them with a future-looking lens. And the other is to understand both the strengths and limitations of floodplain mapping. There are specific frameworks around floodplain mapping that every community knows can be confusing. But what we do know from our experience in all the communities, that the floodplains don't accurately reflect the extent of potential damage to communities, as well as the risk of things like sunny day and flooding. So we know that flooding goes beyond the flood maps, even though they are essential to setting insurance standards and other planning frameworks. So those are general principles, I think, that are well understood. And now the question is how we can actually build on those ideas to implement common sense future rules. Next slide. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit, just to talk a little bit about what the UCI does. As I indicated, we are very active in the New Jersey CRC, the Coastal Resilience Collaborative. So our model is to do some original research, but also collaborate with others. So two of our main functions, we have Tom Harrington, who is the Associate Director of UCI. He is a coastal engineer, and he's been working on these issues for a long time. And he is the co-director of NJCRC, along with Laura Kerr from Stevens, who I see is on this call as well. And they do an incredible job bringing together the partners that represent all sectors of New Jersey to be thinking about these issues over time. But we're also very active in also looking at the science. So we have funding at UCI to actually coordinate a research consortium of universities in New Jersey to be looking at the latest research and to enhance research to address key issues around this issue. We also have support specifically for Meredith Comey, who is our UCI Resilience Restoration Practitioner, and she is the chair of the NJCRC Ecological Restoration and Science Group. So please, there's a link there to our website if you want to find out any more about the work that we're doing at UCI. Next slide, please, Amanda. So again, this is sort of my general principles that reflect to the framework for the rule and some of the issues. I'm not going to go into specific provisions of the rule, but happy to address them in questions to the extent
Did we lose Tony?
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Hey, Tony, if you can hear us, you are frozen at the moment. Not sure if it's your internet connection. Let's see if he hops back on in the next couple seconds. All right. As we wait for Tony, I think we might move on to Tim and give him his moment and see if see if Tony hops back on and he can continue on. Are you okay with that, Tim?
Yeah, that's great. I've been waiting for my moment for a long time. So
All right, let me fast forward here.
what was it Hamilton said? I'm going to take my shot, right?
This will
Okay.
give us a little bit more time to talk about the important aspects of the rules. So
Yeah,
take
great.
it away, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. I was looking through the participants list, and there's a lot of folks that I know, respect, and have worked with around the issues that we're talking about this morning. So I'm glad to see you all there, and I hope that something that I can offer to this morning might help us in the work that we're doing together, because it's maybe let me just back up just a little bit, perhaps. The American Littoral Society is a coastal conservation organization. We're dedicated to promoting the study and conservation of marine life and its habitats. The word littoral, for those of you who don't know, means of or along the coastline. So we work in the estuaries, the bays, along the coasts, rather than out in the blue water ocean. We work to defend the coast from harm in a variety of ways, and we try to, as part of our mission, empower others to do the same, recognizing that we're a fairly small presence in the overall world here. We have our main offices in Sandy Hook in the Gateway National Recreation Area. We have an office in Millville, which we established about 15 years ago, recognizing the special nature of the Delaware Bay Shore in terms of ecology, in terms of the challenges that the communities down there struggle with, both from an environmental perspective and an economic perspective. So we thought it was a appropriate place to make investments organizationally and programmatically. Since Hurricane Sandy, we've been involved in New Jersey coastal policy for a long time, and through the coastal rules themselves, the evaluations of the CZM program, the state planning process as it applied to the coastline, and really, our focus is on habitats, on natural areas, trying to find ways to protect and, in fact, restore them, both for their inherent values, the value to nature, and their value in terms of providing ecological services to the communities that live around them and to the state as a whole. And really, New Jersey, as I think we all proudly know, has got some hugely unique and valuable environmental features to it. So it's valuable to the world, to the hemisphere. It's a stopover place for lots of migratory animals. And then just the fact that we managed to have any nature at all adjacent to the two of the larger cities in the country and all the development that goes along with that. I'm sorry, Tony, you didn't get to finish his presentation, but I think just glancing at his slides, I think he was going to tee up as a framing the issue and the challenges that I think we're all well aware of, is that the impacts of climate change, whether that's sea level rise or increased storm intensity, inundation, the impact on the forests along the edge of the bays themselves, and all the life, and by extension, the communities and the economies that depend upon them, are already feeling the impacts of climate. And we know that. We know that through the storms we've had to wrestle with. We know that through the day-to-day inundation, flooding, the sunny day flooding, the constant erosion, and along the ocean beaches, along the Delaware Bay shore. The changes in life that we're seeing in terms of fisheries changing their location. So, this is not an academic exercise, right? We are living with this. I saw a number of the mayors on the participants. They know what the impacts are, what they're having to anticipate and think about and plan for. And I think that's the real value of these rules. They have strengths and weaknesses, and obviously lots of controversy around them. But I think all in all, in terms of relying on nature, utilizing nature, restoring the nature that we've lost for the values that I just described, is a pretty healthy part of these rules. Since Hurricane Sandy, the Littoral Society has been involved in rebuilding beaches and rebuilding salt marshes, helping with flood control up in northern Monmouth County, fish passage, rebuilding the shorelines, advancing living shorelines. And, in all of those efforts, which are almost wholly done in partnership with municipalities and counties, we find that there are regulatory hurdles that we have had to face in doing what we think are very good projects. Projects are completely in the public interest as opposed to, say, private interests associated with other coastal development that gets regulated and gets managed. Amanda, I see Tony's back on, and I know he has a hard stop. Do you want to interrupt me and let him
No,
go?
I think we can continue on, and he's going to wrap us up after Matt.
Okay, great. All right. So I think, overall, from our perspective in reading the rules, they put some important and necessary changes into the current rules that will make the state more resilient, that will reduce the vulnerabilities that we have built into our present development patterns. I would say that one of the necessities for this rule is that the way we develop along the coastline right now doesn't really take into account or is cognizant about the impacts on nature, on the coastal environment, or that will be associated with climate as the impacts on climate intensify going forward. And that's sort of Tony's point about looking backwards, or the need to look forward. So in these rules, and I won't go through all the details of them because there's a lot there, so everybody knows. But I think in terms of the positive aspects and why an environmental advocacy and conservation group like mine would support them is that it prioritizes the nature-based solutions to resiliency. If you think about the tidal marshes in the state, since we Europeans showed up, we've lost about half of that land base, the acreage that was in tidal marsh. Conversion of tidal marsh to open water now because of sea level rise associated with climate change is a tremendous issue. The salt marshes are not only the fundamental basis for the coastal ecology, but provide storm buffers, right? And we learned that during Sandy and subsequent storms. So those, from a policy perspective, and I think this is reflected in the climate action plan itself, there's a value in us restoring those natural features, right? Building more salt marshes or restoring salt marshes. Kind of unique synchronicity that's happening now is the idea, and it's further enabled by these rules of using the sediments that we're taking out of channels, out of marinas, out of places that we would like to navigate through in particular, and using them, keeping them in the system, and trying to use them to enhance and restore tidal marshes. So there's a whole series of barriers that everybody faces that tries to do this work, primarily because for a long time, and like even currently, rebuilding or changing open water to a salt marsh is seen as fill. And the current DEP rules, while they've gotten better over the years in terms of trying to accommodate this kind of habitat restoration, they still regulate a lot of the practices that we would want to advance in response to climate, as if they're development, right? So they're and anybody that's gone through the process with DEP knows that those are usually fairly rigorous. But we need to stop placing sediment that's been in a system into an area to recreate a salt marsh that was once there, in the same way that we looked at the historic filling of the marshes along the coastline to put houses on. So I think these rules have a number of things that go in and make that a little bit easier and advance the use of nature-based practices for resiliency. And I think we all have a good sense of the value now of those natural features, whether they're oyster reefs or beaches, the dune systems, and the tidal marshes themselves. Can I have the next slide, Amanda, please? Again, so a little more specifics. And this is a project, I know Ben Stoneman's on the call this morning. This is at the mouth of the Morris River in Cumberland County. The big wetland feature to the left of the picture is Basket Flats. This is a wetland peninsula that protects several towns, as well as some businesses going up the Morris River, which has been constantly eroding. And in this project, we built a series of breakwaters, so you can see out there, that are hopefully going to be seeded and populated by oysters. Calms the water behind it, stops the loss of that wetland, hopefully promotes accretion and capture of sediment. And ultimately, the goal is to protect the towns and the communities and the businesses that are behind it by using this nature-based approach. So these rules, we think, will reduce the barriers to doing projects like this, right, by shifting some of the activities into general permitting, waiving the application fees. An important one is a modification of how you can change the sort of the footprint of the coastline in order to do some of this kind of work. There's also some good safeguards in there about recognizing that even on the Atlantic side, that even though we engineer the beaches there significantly, that shouldn't come at a cost of important natural dunes and other natural systems. So again, I think there's been some good steps in these rules that will help prioritize nature-based work and make it easier to do, make it a bigger part of the sort of the arsenal, if you want to call it that, of responses that we have to the challenges and to the stresses that are coming out of climate change. Can I have the next slide as well? Okay. The other part of this is the state has always suffered from a lack of a comprehensive coastal plan, right? And folks that have been involved in these discussions / debates for a long time know that there have been various proposals for coastal commissions for creation of consistent plans or comprehensive plans that look at the coast in totality, not simply on a municipal or county basis. In 1993, the legislature decided that one way to do that would be to link the coastal rules under CAFRA and the Waterfront Development Act, the Tidal Wetlands Act, to the state planning map, right? The identification of everything from urban areas to environmentally sensitive areas, and the creation of centers where hopefully growth would be focused. And outside of the centers, it would be less growth, or the growth would be redirected. It's been problematic that approach has been problematic on a whole different set of levels. This rule tries to bring it into, or proposes to bring it into, the DEP rule structure, right? So that the designation of the areas, the designation of centers will reflect the policies that are already in the coastal rules, which of course emphasize the protection of environmental features, but also have policies which require the state to try to minimize and reduce the vulnerability of development and communities. You know, a very controversial part of this rule is the deletion of the senators' designations on the barrier islands themselves. All of that, which will revert to lowering the impervious coverage limits that are allowable for projects that have CAFR permits, which are larger permits, or the only time it really gets into individual homes, buildings, is when they're the first use right on the beachfront itself. So, if you believe the science, which I do and which others do, and which I think, in Amanda's presentation, the folks that really have studied this for a long time or in consensus, the barriers are going to face tremendous challenges. And while, a discussion and a resolution of what we do in terms of protecting the folks that are there now still has to happen, I think the policy will say, let's minimize the intensity of growth, at least it's regulated at the state level through these rules. So let's not dig the hole deeper, so to speak, by putting more people, more property at risk by building in an area that the science tells us is going to be inundated. There are a number of other, I've run a little long here, I think, but there are a number of other proposed rules in this around wetlands protection, about recognizing environmentally sensitive areas in the state planning process, about the flood hazard areas, including areas that had been exempted before but that are key to the flood patterns. So I'm going to stop there so I can let the discussion go forward. But I think overall, from our position, there are very good proposals in this rule that I think will advance our need to respond to climate and its impacts.
Great, thank you, Tim. Okay, so now we're going to go to Matt Hayden with Stafford Township, and he's going to talk about his experience and perspective on the real rules.
Thank you, Amanda. So from a municipal perspective, the state comes out with rules on a regular basis. So you kind of have to keep in perspective that when those rules come out, not everything is looked at. It's sometimes things are looked at in a silo. So you have to realize, like, when these rules come out, this time where we're allowed to give perspective and input, this is our time to be able to give that perspective back to the state, back to DEP, to show things that they may want to consider. If you can go to the next slide, Amanda. I think I agree with Tim. Like a lot of the rules bring into question, with having coastal and bayfront communities, how do we improve this going forward? We obviously know there's more flooding, there's more sea level rise. How do we plan from this? So from a municipal perspective, in Stafford, we've been doing this for the last 5 years that I've been in Stafford. We've looked at a comprehensive approach, and I think that's part of what these rules, I think are trying to get towards. And I think the good thing is DEP is a really good partner. They've come up with template plans on those communities that have done resiliency planning. So they're there to try and help. I think they're also there to try and help as a part of these rules to take advantage of opportunities, whether it be grants or incentive programs, that if you come up with good plans and you can show you're working towards these rules, that they will work toward, they will work with you to get there. I think you can go to the one thing I will point out on this slide. I think Amanda and Tony and Tim hit this already, the first couple bullet points. But like, for one example, affordable housing. Affordable housing is another state rule that's going to come out this year. How does that play into this rule? That's why I put the question mark there. with, we want more affordable housing from the state level, from the federal level. But if we're taking areas out of the equation, well, then how does that relate and how does that affect coastal and bayfront communities? That's one of the things that has to be thought of as these rules move forward. You can go to the next slide. So I put some just high level basics of this. I think the expected rules are expected to be adopted in July of 2025. If you're following along with these rules, the League of Municipalities has put out a good presentation. So I took some of the information from there to basically highlight what Amanda's already done in her PowerPoint. Is basically they're factoring in increased precipitation, sea level rise predictions. That was the chart that was explained. That's the big thing that everybody will point to is we have to raise everything 5 feet. And then if you add the 1 foot, 6 feet for roads and houses, well, from a municipal standpoint, how do you get around that? If you could go to the next slide, Amanda. The ideas that Tim was talking about, encourage natural-based solutions. You hear a lot. You have to look at from a community perspective, how do you relate this to your community base? So a lot of the people that live on coastal and bayfront communities, what do they want? They want access to the water. Well, if the term dredging comes up and we need to dredge lagoons, well, how do we look at that? Take the science and how do we come up with a natural-based solution to use those spoils to increase the environment that we have, to protect the environment we have, to protect the infrastructure. From a municipal standpoint, what do we want? We want to make sure that we have a healthy community, an environmental friendly community, but we have a good tax base, right? If we're being more resilient, that's what nature-based solutions is we're taking that material and reusing it in a responsible way. That's a good thing for the public. It's also a good thing for the environment. The other thing the state has is our MS4 permits that we have to stay in compliance with. If we're putting in best management practices for the stormwater, improving the water quality, again, what are we doing? We're improving where would you rather live in an area that the water quality is good, that the environment's good. What's that lead to? A good economic base. I think the main two goals with this is to improve compliance with the NFIP, right? So if we're raising the roads 5 feet, what are we doing? We're complying with NFIP for those municipalities, which most in the coastal and bayfront communities participate in the community rating system. This is a huge deal, right? You have to continue to show FEMA that you're in compliance with NFIP or show you're working towards it. I think that's what these rules, and if you listen to the DEP presentations, is they're going to try to work with municipalities to become in compliance with this. It's about, it's not going to happen overnight. The other things to try and improve the DEP permitting process. From a municipal level, I can tell you there's multiple times where you get calls up from residents that want bulkheads, docks. They want to dredge certain waterways. Okay, what permit do we do? Is it a general permit? It is an individual permit. How do we get this? How do we obtain it? And it's not always clear, especially then when you have to hire professionals like engineers and planners to be able to go and file these permits. Next slide, Amanda. So how do you do it? The big thing here in Stafford that we've been doing is we work on plans. We worked with DEP to develop a resilient Stafford plan. We came up with the individual plans for our sections of the town with Beach Haven West and Mud City. But it's an overall approach. This is part of running a municipality. You can't just look at what's coastal resiliency. That's why I included the stormwater rules. If you're raising roads, where are we putting the stormwater? Where are the driveways going to go? How are the people going to get into their homes? All of these things are questions that you have to answer. And the way you do that is coming up with good plans to come up with how are we going to start? And if we're working towards these goals, how are we going to finish? Well, you don't get there overnight. So you have to have a good plan, and you also have to realize that that plan includes the public. That's why the next thing is government process. You have to, keep your mayors and your governing bodies informed. Keep the public informed. That's the education point. We're constantly doing workshops and educating the public on grants that we get, bringing people in, talking to them, going after grants, making people aware of grants that they're available for, and making sure. That's why having really good plans is important, because that's when grant opportunities come out. Sometimes those grants are going to work well with the plans you have, and sometimes they're not. If they don't, it doesn't make sense on wasting any time going after them. It makes sense on doing what's right for your community, and each community is different. That's why you have to make it specific to that community. Next slide, Amanda. That's why the next slide's community, right? If you have an educated public, if you continue to do, I've been here for 5 years. I think we've done over 60 workshops on different topics. And you take that input that the community gives you, you take that input, you work with your governing body, you work with your staffs at the municipal level, and take all those things in, and you educate yourself while you're educating the public on, for example, the real rules. What are they? What are we going to have to do? Doing that outreach and making the information available makes for an educated public, which makes for educated decisions for what the governing body and ultimately the municipality does. The next slide just shows some examples of what we've been doing. So I mentioned, in line with what the real rules say about the 5 feet, the +1, we've been doing home elevation grants through FEMA's Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. We've been going through this, and we do multiple workshops a year, notify our RL, repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss, and substantially damaged properties of what's available to them. And every year we put in grants to be able to help elevate homes. When I started back in 2019, we had 1,500 homes that need to be elevated. Right now we're around 700. So we're not at zero, but we're getting to that point. Next slide. From a overall perspective, I mentioned dredging and how that relates to natural-based solutions. Back in 2020, we did a comprehensive lagoon management study. This slide shows a bathymetric survey of areas that we know need to be dredged. Well, what do? We took that information, obtained a permit with DEP, so members of the public that live in these communities can go out and dredge themselves. You can also use that information to go after grants, which we've been doing. Next slide, Amanda. This is a $5 million grant that we obtained. I mentioned we worked with DEP to do a resilient Stafford plan. This is a $5 million grant that we're working with Forsyth Refuge, the DEP, DOT, to use some of those dredge spoils from that lagoon study to rebuild this sill. It not only rebuilds the environment, which is the nature-based solutions, but it provides a level of protection to Beach Haven West. That's a big thing for the environment, the people that live in Beach Haven West, and how we're going to protect the community. Next slide, Amanda. The other thing we did was our sewer system was failing back in 2019. These sections of the township, they're numbered. We're at section 5. We've been able to obtain some funding from the state to be able to help replace this sewer system. If you go to the next slide though, Amanda, what it shows is we've cleaned up over 186 acres of bay in Manahawkin Bay, which is part of Barnegat Bay. We're the only municipality in the state of New Jersey that's done this over the last 20 years from what the state tells us. This is from looking at a plan, coming up with how are we going to fund this, looking for other funding mechanisms to do it, keeping the public educated when we do it, and then going out and implementing that plan. Next slide. This is another grant we obtained. This was for around $1.4 million. It's to build a bulkhead at our Mill Creek Park. We have a water tower there. We have a sewer pump station there. We're working with our local utilities authority for sewer. What the process is our sewer from our collection system to build a bulkhead. This is to avoid erosion of the park. The park was basically observed to be eroding over time. Well, that's in our plan. That was why we have a good plan. And then we use that to go after federal money to try to fund it. And now we're in the process of doing that. Next slide. The other thing is there's stormwater issues. I mentioned that MS4 permit. This is a $4.4 million grant that we obtained through hazard mitigation to be able to build out in our Ocean Acres section of our township. So I mentioned Stafford Township is not just a bayfront community, but it goes inland into the Pinelands. With poor infrastructure and aging infrastructure, you have to look at a comprehensive approach of how you're going to do this. So it's having those, again, it's just having those plans. And if you go to the next slide, Amanda, I'll finish up. It's having those plans in place. It's doing what we're doing right now with NJCRC. Part of the reason of having this network is having a good partner like DEP, like the CRC, and working with good partners like this. Because, for example, Tony brought up his slide. I'm taking down the website. Okay, I'm going to go check that out. Maybe that's another resource for me. And the other point, the last point I'll make is this doesn't happen overnight. So even with the real impact rules, these rules are, if they go into effect, even if they go into effect they are now, there's an expectation that you're not going to get there, all in one shot. It's one day at a time, and you have to continue to work at it.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. I see Tony has rejoined us. Tony, do you want to say any final thoughts on your end? I know
Yeah.
you have to hop off soon.
Yeah, if you can bring the slides back up, I'd appreciate it if that's possible without too much
Yeah.
difference. I'm going to keep my video and hopefully avoid another hiccup in terms of where we're going. But I'll go through this very quickly and just say this is where I was. I mean, I think Matt really put it up front. This is a process. I think really looking at Stafford as looking at the multiple benefits of these activities and how they can work for a broad. Resilient communities aren't just about sea level rise. They're about the communities in them and how they exist, where they're going to be in the future, and how they're going to get these multiple benefits that he indicated that I think are implicit in this rule if done right. So, I just did want to point out, kind of looking at the framework, that again, the reality is that compounding risk reflected in surging homeowner insurance rates, that is something we need to be looking at, right? So I do think clearly what's happened in North Carolina and Florida make us very aware of the realities of the failure to act and what the increased impact on communities can be without acting. So I do think the need for action, I think that case has been pretty clear. Next slide. Again, this is a lot of words and you'll look at it, but I do think we do need to look at that. It is important, as Matt suggested, but to really look at sort of what the burden and administrative burdens are going to be on communities. How do we make it work for them over time, not day one, to make sure that we address some of the concerns of the municipalities and homeowners, to be sure that we consider how we make this workable for those communities over time. Again, I think they could, if designed right, have this positive economic impact of reducing long-term costs, disaster assistance, and infrastructure repair. I'm not a finance guy, I'm a lawyer and a policy guy, but in response to Governor Murphy's executive order for NJ PACT, Moody's Investment Services determined that New Jersey's adaptation of stronger building codes, especially along the 130-mile coastline, is credit positive. And so really thinking about New Jersey's economic vulnerability to increase is a substantive thing in terms of finance in a broader sense. We also need to look at those riskiest areas to be sure that it is insurable. We can't necessarily rely, NFIP is really the insurer of last resort to some extent, but we're really not really clear the extent to which those programs are available over time to insure against future losses. So we do need to be very aware of those kind of issues. Next slide. Again, I'll just very quickly go through these quickly. Again, NJCRC has several work groups that we're working on very actively around that. We asked folks to get involved. We have the Ecological Restoration and Science Work Group, which is chaired by Meredith Comey from UCI. Next slide. We have the Building Beneficial Use Learning Network, which is really looking at beneficial use of dredge material. UCI I just finished facilitating a project with NJDEP to look at a regional sediment management plan for how we use the sediment from the back bays to actually restore some of our wetlands along Barnegat Bay and other areas. So really thinking about how we can get that dual benefit of dredging some of the channels, but also using it to the extent possible to restore wetlands, I think is a net positive. Next slide. Again, we also have the Coastal Habitat and Aquatic Resource Research and Monitoring Group. So there is this group, please get involved in thinking about how we actually think about what these habitats and how we make them successful to both create some of the ecological benefits that we all enjoy, but as well as the storm control benefits. Next. So again, I just want to kind of conclude a little bit by saying this is a project that's moving forward. So we are looking to really be proactive, and the state has been really a leader in looking for funding for these activities. The folks aren't aware that New Jersey was just awarded a $575 million grant to collaborate with communities on resilience in coastal communities and extreme weather events. A lot of that money goes to major projects in underrepresented and overburdened communities to be sure that we can reduce some of those impacts. And we actually are developing a framework, a design pipeline for really looking for opportunities, as Matt suggested, where we can actually look at identifying projects which could be put into a design pipeline that have technical assistance they need to sort of develop the plans that they need to do, and also looking at sort of adaptation plans. So I'll just conclude by saying this rule isn't going to solve every problem. I do think that everybody on this call is in a joint agreement that we're going to need a lot of money to be more adaptive and resilient in New Jersey. So we do need to be looking not only at the rulemaking side of the equation, but also the investment side, to be sure that the investments are going into our coastal communities in a way that actually will support the implementation of these rules and building out a more resilient New Jersey in the future. So again, thanks. Sorry for the technical problems, and look forward to any questions that come up.
Thanks, Tony. I'm gonna fast forward really quick. The technical assistance work group had pulled together some identified funding sources that currently exist specific to nature-based solutions. So I just want to point these out. The National League of Cities has an article out on tapping the potential of and funding for nature-based solutions with a bunch of different resources. FEMA has their hazard mitigation assistance programs and technical assistance programs that you could look into. And there's also a summary guide across many federal sources with the REPI Resilience Guide that you can take a look at. So that's just something we pulled together real quick. And I know we have Matt on the call, who's also the CRS coordinator for Stafford Township. And we also pulled together some opportunities that have been shown for CRS credit with the NJ PACT REAL rules. So the current floodplain will have 4 feet of additional freeboard, and we will go from a 16% of state's land area being in the floodplain to 17.5. It remains to be seen how CRS will reward the extension of the floodplain, but the freeboard requirement would be in play for freeboard credit. And this could result in increases in points under Activity 420. These points would likely be realized under the CRS Uniform Minimum Credit for state requirements. And the manual states that if more than 3 feet of freeboard is used, then the regulations will be reviewed for potential additional credit. And I just want to point out that, sorry, I lost my place. Please note that the final point determination is made by the ISO rep and dependent on the community showing that they are actively enforcing these requirements. There's a ton of resources out there. We had a coffee chat recently on NJ Restores. The state's investing in that program for a nature-based solution moving forward in funding implementation and act as case studies for future projects. Matt had mentioned the Resilient New Jersey programs. Look at those templates. And so I think I am going to stop there and open it up to see if we have any questions. You can use the Q&A feature or the chat. I see a couple of comments in the chat. I think Matt answered some questions. Does the state have plans in the rules to raise critical state roads evacuation routes?
My understanding of that, Amanda, is what the state's trying to do with these rules is, I believe, my understanding from listening to their presentations is it's a good faith effort by the DEP and the state to try to work with municipalities to try to go after these funds. So, like, for example, we have bridges that go into other municipalities that we know there's sections that need to be raised. Well, we're working with DOT, we're working with the state OEM to try to go after some of these hazard mitigation funds to do it. And I believe, having those plans and this backup in place is how they plan to try to get funding. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. Usually a lot of these grants, you apply, if we're working on FMA grants now that we'll apply for, and we probably won't have grant agreements for 1.5 to 2 years. And that's if we're successful. Not everyone's successful. You have to keep going at it.
Are there policies with state and federal government for across the board funding for victims of these coastal hazards?
I think what they're talking about there, Amanda, is through FEMA. Usually what happens is if there's like with Hurricane Sandy, there's a process that goes in place where the governor will request federal funding from the president through FEMA. And then once they declare an event, that's when FEMA funding through it's called public worksheets and public individual assistance. You can go in and start to get funding. That's typically, I think that's the question being asked.
All right, so we are on the dot at 11 o'clock. You can see our panelists' contact information on the screen. I want to thank them for taking time out of their day to present this material to you. At the end of today's chat, you will receive a link for a post-event evaluation. Please let us know how we did. We would love to hear from you, and we'd love to see everybody tomorrow for our stormwater and flood hazards chat at 10 a.m. So thank you all for joining us.